Tony Blair. Power is a drug. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Many of you will be familiar with Tony Blair, or to give him his full name, Sir Anthony Charles Linton Blair. It's worthwhile providing you with a quick resume of Mr. Blair, or Sir Tony. He's a British politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007, and he was leader of the Labour Party, taking over from when John Smith died in 1994 through to 2007. He was leader of the opposition from 94 to 97 and held various shadow cabinet posts from 1987 to 1994. He was Member of Parliament for Sedgefield from 1983 to 2007. He's the second longest-serving Prime Minister in post-war British history after Margaret Thatcher, and the longest-serving Labour politician to have held the office. He studied law at St John's College, Oxford, and qualified as a barrister. He became involved in the Labour Party and was elected to the House of Commons in 1983 for the Sedgefield constituency in County Durham. He became the youngest Prime Minister of the 20th century after his party won a landslide victory of 418 seats, the largest in its history, in the 1997 general election, bringing an end to 18 years in opposition. During his first term, he enacted constitutional reforms and significantly increased public spending on healthcare and education, while also introducing controversial market-based reforms in these areas. He saw the introduction of a minimum wage, tuition fees for higher education, constitutional reforms such as devolution in Scotland and Wales, an extensive expansion of LGBT plus rights in the United Kingdom, and significant progress in the Northern Ireland peace process. He won a second term after Labour won a second landslide victory in the 2001 general election. 3 months into his second term, his premiership was shaped by the 9/11 terrorist attacks, resulting in the start of the War on Terror. Blair supported the foreign policy of the George W. Bush administration by ensuring that the British armed forces participated in the war in Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban, destroy al-Qaeda, and capture Osama bin Laden. Blair supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq and had the British armed forces participate in the Iraq War on the inaccurate beliefs that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction and developed ties with al-Qaeda. The invasion of Iraq was particularly controversial, as it attracted widespread public opposition, and 139 of Blair's own MPs opposed it. As a result, he faced criticism over the policy itself and the circumstances of the decision. Many accused him of misleading Parliament. His popularity dropped dramatically, and there are some that maintain that he ought to be indicted and tried for war crimes. He won a third term in 2005 as a consequence of a strong economic performance, but with a substantially reduced majority due to the UK's involvement in the Iraq War. He pushed for more systemic public sector reform and brokered a settlement to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland. He had a surge in popularity at the time of terrorist bombings of London in July 2005, but by the spring of 2006 faced significant difficulties, most notably with scandals over failures by the Home Office to deport illegal immigrants. Amid the Cash for Honour scandal, Blair was interviewed 3 times as Prime Minister, though only as a witness and not under caution by the police. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars continued, and in 2006, Blair announced he would resign within a year. He resigned the party leadership on the 24th of June 2007, and as Prime Minister on 27th of June was succeeded by Gordon Brown. Blair since has been involved in establishing a foundation. He joined the investment bank JP Morgan Chase in a senior advisory capacity and to advise Zurich Financial Services on climate change. The salary was unknown, but was claimed to be in excess of £500,000 a year. He was also providing lectures earning up to $250,000 for a 90-minute speech. In 2008, he was said to be the highest paid speaker in the world. He established Tony Blair Associates to allow him to provide, in partnership with others, strategic advice on a commercial and pro bono basis on political and economic trends and governmental reform. The profits from the firm go towards supporting Blair's work on faith, Africa, and climate change. He has repeatedly remained involved in trying to shape policy, and He has been involved in various political interventions and continues to express political views. And he was interviewed only recently, which provides you with interesting insight into the mind of Blair as a narcissist. Alice Thompson interviewed him for The Times, and it's rather revealing some of the factors that come out of the discussion that takes place. In this, she reports, look, you know, actually, when I was a Prime Minister, Twitter didn't exist. I didn't have a mobile phone. There'd be no pandemic. There was no Ukraine war. Oasis were playing. It was an optimistic period. Ah, yes. Now Oasis are back again. Maybe it's time for a 90s revival. The journalist remembers a young Tony Blair on the steps of Number 10 on May the 2nd, 1997, clutching his dad mug, with his kids and Cherie, just out of her nightie, waving at the crowd singing Things Can Only Get Better. He still has that snaggletooth smile, slight tan, concerned look, and impeccable manners 27 years later, as we sit in his chrome and glass office in London drinking espressos. But surely Sir Tony Blair, call me Tony, wouldn't want to be leader now. Not at 71, when he has his own Grade 1 listed Queen Anne country estate, residual benefit, and townhouse near Hyde Park, residual benefit, myriad grandchildren, and can wear £800 loafers without socks on a yacht in Sardinia, and not care what the press says anymore. He still has a limousine outside and a staff of 1,000 at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. He has barely cooked an omelette, and certainly hasn't washed his pristine white shirts for decades, or done the supermarket shop. He has all the perks of a statesman without the responsibilities, which, of course, is rather appealing to a narcissist, because responsibility is something that the narcissist rejects and shirks, but also wants to have the authority and power. Yet there are moments, the former Prime Minister admits, he still wishes he were in Downing Street. He certainly thinks he would do it better this time around. Frankly, I had no experience, nothing on how to govern. I hadn't even been a minister when I entered Number 10. With his doe eyes and bushy tail, he started out being called Bambi by the press, but by the end he was called Beliar by those who blamed him for dragging Britain into the Iraq War. Use of lie, unusual and dubious pretext for asserting control through military intervention. Well, you start at your most popular and least capable and end up your least popular and most capable, he says, sounding sanguine. Is that why he'd like another shot, now he has more wisdom? He laughs. When he suggests it to his wife, Cherie, he says, she politely reminds him that it wasn't all rose gardens the first time. Notice that how the need to control people looms large still in the mind of this individual. His narcissism tells him, you were inexperienced. Make it look like some false humility. Engage in telling people that you'd like another shot at it because you think you'd do it better this time around. Now, there's no doubt, of course, that one learns from experience, but that isn't what's actually driving his desire to hold the reins of power once again. It's simply his narcissism tells him that he would do it even better, that he actually didn't do it too badly the first time around. He's simply saying that he was somewhat incapable and had no experience in order to make himself look like he's being humble. In actual fact, his narcissism is driving him to want to get his hands on the reins of power because, of course, that will enable him to control people, to draw fuel from them, to get even more residual benefits. Indeed, Blair has become a very rich man as a consequence of what is achieved post being Prime Minister. He has instead written a manual, like how to train your dog or how to lose weight. Only his new book on leadership gives advice and tips about how to run a country. This exhibits his grandiosity. Certainly, he has had experience and therefore there is information that may be useful. But the fact that he believes that he is best placed to tell people how to run a country demonstrates a grandiosity about him. And, of course, it's a method of asserting control. Here is my diluted wisdom. Utilize, or rather distilled wisdom. Utilize it. Perhaps some of the individuals engaging in my If I Ruled My World might read it. It's niche, admittedly. There are fewer than 200 rulers globally. But for a place like Britain that appears to have run through a great many prime ministers in the past decade, it might be extremely useful. Blair did win 3 resounding election victories in a row, and is one of the few modern leaders who voluntarily stepped down for his successor, his neighbour Gordon Brown, rather than being ousted. Don't bear any grudges is one of the mantras in his book. Sir Keir Starmer could benefit, perhaps, from Blair's wisdom. It's Starmer's birthday, the day I visit Blair in his office. Has he given him as a present? This book is not for him, Blair says, but realise that sounds mildly rude. I haven't given him a copy yet. It's really important to understand that this isn't just about my time as PM, but the work my institute has done since with different governments around the world. Notice that the power-hungry Blair was not only content with governing, not only was he not content to remain just governing a country, but since then, under the auspices of his institute, he has looked to assert control on different governments around the world. Blair started writing his book 3 years ago, before he says Starmer had even begun to think about how to replace the scrolling phone wallpaper at number 10. 15 countries are waiting to join the programme. About 40 are already in. Wherever you are in the world, leaders are worried about the same things. It's how to prioritise, get the right policies, the right teams. Well, in actual fact, most leaders aren't worrying about those things at all. What they are concerned about is maintaining power, because power enables them to assert control and to draw fuel, because many world leaders are, of course, narcissists. He's become the personal trainer to the political elite. Note again the grandiosity there, and how he still needs to have a hand on the tiller by virtue of control. He encourages and cajoles them to work smarter, to think harder and focus. Go for it, he writes. It's a great time to be governing. Is there any country he would refuse to help? Dictatorships, perhaps? A far-right government or a communist one? Look, I prefer democracies, he says. Before the now more pragmatic, less innocent, idealistic Blair adds, but I also understand that some countries aren't, and the lessons are the same irrespective of whether you are a democracy, dictatorship, or authoritarian. When it's clear I appear mildly alarmed by the idea that he's helping insalubrious regimes, he adds, there are a lot of countries we say no to. The line is the country moving in the right direction? But of course, bear in mind, who decides what is the right direction? Blair. It is, in the end, all about getting the right things done. And that can be done by a democratically elected leader or an undemocratically nominated leader. In other words, he demonstrates the expedience of the narcissist, that if I deem that it's appropriate to offer my help, I'll do so, and I'll find a basis for justifying it. In fact, he admits it can be hard to achieve a great deal in a 21st century democracy, with an increasingly volatile electorate stirred up by social media and populist agitators, i.e., threats to control. The biggest challenge for democracy is the fact that everything pushes you towards short-term responses to political events, rather than long-term structural change. It may take 28 days to alter a habit. Actually, it takes far longer, and it varies dependent on the type of person, but that's for another day. But it takes a minimum of 10 years to change a country, Blair suggests. Think about Britain. Margaret Thatcher, John Major, myself, that's 3 PMs in 30 years. And there's quite a lot of continuity in policy around business and enterprise. That gives you a certain stability as a country. Then you take it from then to now, and it's like, we can't even remember how many PMs we've had. We list them together. Brown, Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, and now Starmer. Is this why he's writing the book? To show future leaders how to stay in power? Yes, but look, the one thing the book is not advice to Keir. It wasn't conceived like that, it wasn't written like that, and it was finished well before the election. It's something that anyone who is coming into a position of leadership could read. I hope it will have an application outside politics. You could take the lesson, firm objectives, boundaries, the ability to remain calm, to any leadership role. Does he really think he would make a better leader now? Of course. The purpose of the book is to try to shorten the learning curve. There are things that I've now learned that could have been taught before I started. But circumstances change. Every leader faces a different set of challenges. In Blair's era, Britain was worrying about millennium bugs, foot and mouth disease, Cherie's contraception, all now forgotten by the majority. The Treasury coffers weren't empty. One audience member on Question Time in 2005 even complained to Blair that they were being given doctor's appointments too quickly. Some fundamentals still held true. the former Prime Minister believes. If someone had explained to me what the civil service could do and couldn't at the very outset, it would have helped. True, but surely Blair was a leader for sunnier times when the country generally thought things could only get better. Today is more anxious, but the basic lessons are still the same. Social media is in some ways a plague, again, threat to control, but that makes it all the more important to take a step back, not let yourself get buffeted by the story of the day, and remember what you want to achieve. It's all about focusing on the final results, he says, which of course means that the end justifies the means. Don't worry about the small stuff. It's not going to be about the bits of semi-gossip and froth. Don't read it, he writes in the book. Assertion of control by withdrawal. No one talks to me about the Millennium Dome anymore, or the cringeworthy singing of Auld Lang Syne with the Queen. It's important to think about what will really change lives rather than worrying whether you'll be judged on trivia. Again, that on the face of it is sound advice, but it is demonstrative of the way that he asserts control by simply shunting it to one side, that he doesn't deal with what he sees as problematic. Temperament, he says, is obviously very important in a leader, but too often overlooked by voters. A chapter is devoted to avoiding paranoia. Paranoia is prevalent amongst narcissists as a driving force for the pursuit of the prime aims. Blair recognises that paranoia is problematic, and subconsciously it is a threat to control. Therefore, he looks to deal with it. Let's not mention Gordon Brown, who was known to get a little overwrought in Downing Street, or Boris Johnson, who veered the other way, taking nothing but birthday cakes and Peppa Pig seriously. See elsewhere for my analysis of Boris Johnson and his various behaviours. Of course you care about what people say about you, but you have to be able to create a degree of attachment. Otherwise your energy gets diverted from what matters. Cherie was very good at that, and at saying to me, if you don't like the criticism, leave. Don't stay and complain about it. That's the way it is. Again, assertion of control through withdrawal. In On Leadership, Blair writes that he only had 2 moments of pure delight in his 10 years as leader. One was winning the bid for the 2012 Olympics. That seems surprising. There was Leo's birth too. But what about all those supermodels and band members partying at Downing Street to celebrate Cool Britannia? The barbecues with the royals at Balmoral and golf with President Clinton near Chequers. I remember going to Kosovo with him as a reporter after he'd helped depose Slobodan Milosevic, with everyone shouting, "Tony!" and prostrating themselves at his feet. Doesn't he sometimes wish he had enjoyed it all more? I find it odd to describe it as enjoying, which of course is because the narcissist doesn't truly enjoy things. The responsibility felt huge. Maybe it would be different now. I am older. I agree there's something irritating about leaders who look like they're having too good a time, revelling in their power a little too much. There is a stage for many leaders, he writes, when they've been in power for a few years, with everyone fating them, and they become too hubristic, inviting nemesis. Did he too? Perhaps. But now he's wiser. I know this isn't a book specifically about how to run Britain, but what would Blair do now if he were leading a moderately sized European country that felt slightly lost? This is Blair's happy space. He sits back and enthuses. Indeed, he's being invited to offer his observations and assert control. I think today you have got 2 big challenges. One is how you return to high levels of productivity and economic growth. The second is a set of quasi-cultural issues around immigration and crime and so on, he says. I believe the answer to both lies in technology. That's an easy response, I reply. Of course the architect of New Labour loves a bit of modernisation, but it's hard to achieve, surely. This is our 19th century industrial revolution. It will change everything about the way we live, work and interact, and therefore how we understand, master and employ it is the key thing, he says, sounding a little too smooth. Blair recognising how technology is instrumental in the assertion of control. The problem is that Rishi Sunak adored a bit of AI as much as his Adidas Sambas, and Starmer also professes to be a bit of a tech geek, but it will all cost money Britain doesn't have. This government has just cancelled the new exascale supercomputer in Edinburgh and abandoned £1.3 billion of funding for tech. I'm not sure we're capable of being at the forefront of any revolution at the moment. No, says Blair, but in my view, the great opportunity Britain has, which is why I am optimistic, is that after America and China, we are number 3 in the world in this field of technology. So we should do everything we possibly can to work out how we keep the really good ideas here, develop them and build businesses. Blair's solution is still universities. They're the engine for economic growth. They are places where you incubate innovation, and we are second in the world on universities. There is this anti-university sentiment now, but no one is forcing children. They want to go. He doesn't think that there are too many students or that they are doing Mickey Mouse courses. We need to keep improving our universities for them. But we have more universities in the world's top 50 in the Times Higher Education World Rankings than the rest of Europe put together. That is a huge strength. His great fear is that there are too many, both the young and among his generation, who aren't motivated to do anything. He's always telling his children, issuing orders, to work hard first, then play hard, not the other way around. This is a septuagenarian who thinks nothing of visiting 40 countries in a year on his global circuit, assertion of control on a global basis, exhausting his bodyguards as he flits around the world, keeping up regular gym appointments, and is horrified when I ask if he has any chillaxing retirement plans, which, of course, retirement is a diminution of his ability to control. We have a big problem with people leaving the workforce, he says. It is a huge problem, and we're going to have to go deep to try to deal with it. We're going to have to really think through welfare and how we reskill people, and again, technology has a lot to do. The young in India don't work 9 to 5, he stresses. The basic point is you cannot afford to continue with this level of people of working age not working, never starting, quitting early. People have lost their way. I suspect this is a man who is not a massive fan of 4-day weeks, working from home and duvet days. For a moderniser, he can appear a remarkably old-fashioned boomer. When I once asked him whether he tried any therapy, he looked bemused. We would reject that as a threat to control. For a man who encourages all to emote when Princess Diana died, he's stiff-upper-lipped about his own life, embarrassed by too much introspection or soul-searching. But what does he think has happened to the British psyche? Why do people feel more vulnerable and fragile now, less able to engage with life? I think as a result of several things. Stagnant real wages, the pandemic, but also countries need a real sense of direction and purpose. They need to know where they are going. That is the part of the job of the political leader. People have to feel the future is going to be challenging, but also exciting, with possibilities. I think we lost direction. If the former Prime Minister put the British on the couch, he would tell them that they need to stop being so introspective and thinking that their best days are behind them. No country can succeed or improve with that attitude. Notice again the grandiosity here of where he also effectively psychoanalyzes an entire country. If we want to keep up, we are going to have to change, be tough-minded, be out there hustling and bustling, and that includes everyone. He's not necessarily wrong in the things that he says, but understand through his narcissism, all of this is being said in order to control. And he still wants to control the country. He wants to control other countries. He wants to tell them how to lead. He can't give up the sense of power that he requires. This is demonstrative in what he says next. Blair admits he felt lost after he left Downing Street, floundering for a while, finding it hard to build a new life, i.e. he doesn't have his hands on the reins of power, thus that's a threat to control. When I was creating the Institute, it was hard work, he says. We were like a startup trying to get people interested. It was exhausting, but unless you are prepared to work, you won't get anywhere. I think it's sad if people are just giving up. You should wake up in the morning with a sense of purpose and go to sleep counting your blessings, or your days will feel pretty empty. He does advise some downtime for leaders and the rest of us to strum that guitar or play some five-a-side football. Holidays? Take them. Angela Rayner clubbing in Ibiza doesn't matter. Keir buying a cat or dog? Do what you want. The public don't really care. But you have to sacrifice stuff. It's full-time being PM. You can't switch off entirely. His own resilience, he concedes, may have come from the setbacks he encounters as a child. He's always been reticent talking about his early life, assertion of control, but since he's left office, we've discussed how his father, a self-made barrister with the dream to become a Tory MP, had a serious stroke when he was 40 and his youngest son was only 10. The only words that Elder Blair could say were good and tea. It definitely disciplined me that life was uncertain, the young Tony said. His older sister was also ill with rheumatoid arthritis in hospital. When he was just 22, as he was finishing at Oxford University, his mother died of cancer. He refuses to see this as astonishingly bad luck for the Blair family. Despite all the difficulties, I felt lucky and loved. I honestly believe that if you have a sense of victimhood, it's hard to achieve anything. A lot of the work we do now is with some of the poorest countries in the world. You see far worse problems. No electricity, sanitation, if they fall ill, little decent health care. We have a lot to be grateful for. I'm very sympathetic to people who have serious mental health problems, but it is important that we try to create a sense of possibilities in life, not just the drawbacks. His book on leadership never mentions the word nanny. He doesn't believe that citizens in any country need to be lectured or scolded, but he does feel they can be helped to do the right thing with nudges, assertion of control, such as sugar taxes and bans on smoking in public places. Blair's being called messianic by several of his contemporaries, but he sounds at times more like a life coach. Everything is about becoming our best selves. Another of his ideas, which he failed to accomplish over 2 decades ago, is to convince the British to adopt ID cards, assertion of control, but Starmer has just ruled them out again. You have a passport, a driving licence, social security number. It's sensible to have it all in one place to do your private and public business. Australia has just introduced them. When you look around the world, the right digital infrastructure is becoming an essential part of success. It's easy to have goals and ideas when you're out of office, but they are harder to sell when you're in Downing Street, having to juggle competing voices and interests and balance the books. It isn't the job of the leader simply to find out what the public wants and try to do it. It's the job of the leader to set out where you think the country should go and persuade people to follow you, he says. They may not love you, but in the end they respect you more. The thing that is most bizarre about government is that once you get in, you realise it's like being a CEO. That is a skill set that is very different from campaigning. You still need that ability to communicate, but if there's one central thing this book is about, it's policy and delivery. Campaigning and politics needs to become secondary. It's almost always a disaster if you're about just your party positioning and ideology. There are some recent leaders like Liz Truss who did have a vision and tried to push through radical reform, and she only lasted 45 days. I try not to be critical about anyone who's done the job, as I know how difficult it is, but generally the most important thing about any leader is not their retail skills, but their ability to find solutions. Without getting into individual PMs, part of the most difficult thing for Britain these past years has been the absence of coherent long-term thinking. You just get snatches of different types of leadership with different perspectives and ways of doing things, and this caused a lot of confusion. Blair keeps stressing that he doesn't want to interfere or advise Starmer, who he says has made a great start. I think the pensioners will be disagreeing with that. Of course, I have conversations with cabinet ministers, interference, assertion of control, but I'm not perched on their shoulder yapping away, because there's nothing more irritating than that. But one piece of advice he gives leaders in all countries is to be a change maker. Don't just sign your name in the visitor's book, write yourself into the history books, grandiosely. He is disarmingly frank at the end of On Leadership about his own desire for power. The moment I saw what power was and what it could do, I wanted it, he writes, written like a narcissist. To change the world, grandiosity. To put principle into practice, to be respected and recognised as a person with power. He admits that politics requires ambition, wheeling and dealing, ruthlessness and a little luck. Power, he says, is like a drug, which is painful to give up, because, of course, power enables the control to be obtained. Power enables the fuel to be obtained. Power is so important to the narcissist. Crucially, he adds, before he sounds too like Scar in The Lion King, ambition should never eclipse principles. Facade management, you have to have a plan to improve your country. Otherwise, what is the point in being there? The former Labour leader would like to be remembered for overseeing the Good Friday Peace Agreement, transforming inner-city schools and public services. But for years, all some could remember was his taking Britain into the Iraq War. Blair, who usually loves a bit of geopolitical strategic analysis, tenses as soon as the word Iraq is mentioned, threat to control, but he understands that it is part of his legacy. And he's willing once more to reiterate why he took the decision to invade the country based on what the world now knows was flawed intelligence. I always took the view: 1, America's closest ally; 2, key player in Europe; 3, build a Department of International Development into the best soft power in the world. Of course, I realise people will still bring Iraq up. I always say I'm happy to take full responsibility for the decision I took. That's not going to pacify those who still believe he behaved atrociously. But Blair is unrepentant. Lack of remorse. He only mentions Iraq 4 times in the book's index, the same as Japan. Despite the 2.6 million word 7-year inquiry into Iraq, his views have not changed. He still believes Britain had to stand shoulder to shoulder with America. The UK had to decide whether to be a real ally, making real commitment, or whether it would merely cheer from the sidelines. We chose the former, and there will be many who think that choice was wrong. But I believed it was crucial for Britain in the long term to remain America's closest ally. There is no have your cake and eat it philosophy of policymaking. Choices can be really tough, he says. The real mistake, he believes, was to assume that democracy could be easily transplanted into countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, blame shifting. But he is determined the anger about Iraq should not eclipse almost completely the achievements. Whoever becomes president at the next US election, Britain should still hug America tightly, he says. On an objective basis, America has re-emerged in the past 2 or 3 years as easily the strongest country on earth with the most resilient economy. When I left office, our average wages were slightly above those of America. Now they are 40% behind. Its technology is leading the world. It's the biggest oil and gas producer. Its military is still easily the most capable, and yet its politics is quite dysfunctional. There is no doubt there are a great deal more dangers globally than there were in my time, so America remains an important, incredibly important ally. Last time we met, when I asked him what still kept him awake at night, he answered, and this was a month before the war started, Russia invading Ukraine. Does he worry now, like some global strategists, that a third world war is around the corner? No. But for me, the problems with Brexit was always the loss of engagement with our own continent. Because if you think about the way the world is developing, there will be 3 superpowers: America, China, and India by the middle of this century. India's population alone will be more than 1.5 billion. It will be more than the population of America and Europe put together and doubled. Meanwhile, our birth rate is going down. So it's clear that smaller countries will have to group together to sit at the same table. Much of what he says sounds sensible. He's still the master of the middle way, but even with his determination to encourage states around the world to espouse his moderate Goldilocks politics, not too hot or cold, the centrists appear to be losing out this century. Populists exploit grievances, but they don't create them. You cannot just be the mushy middle. You have to show people that their lives will get better, he replies. An interview with Blair which demonstrates his need to continue to tell people how to lead. All done with the facade of, presumably, of not wanting to be seen to interfere, but, of course, a recognition that power was so important to him, that power was a drug that he wanted and still requires, because, driven by his unaware narcissism, he has to ensure that he remains relevant, that he has to, even at the age of 71, continue to engage with countries around the world through the foundation that he has created, that he has created personal wealth which is considerable, and that he simply can't let go as a consequence of his narcissism. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.